Okay, last time we looked at Descartes' conception of knowledge, and in this hopefully shorter video, we'll try to sort of sum up what we came up with last time. I'll at the start I'd like to go back to the paragraph from discourse on method, which we looked at in the last video, and from there hopefully I'll link our discussion today to the previous discussion. So there Descartes says that admittedly we never see people pulling down all the houses of a city for the sole purpose of rebuilding them in a different style to make the street more or to make in a different style to make the street more attractive. But we do see many individuals having their houses pulled down in order to rebuild them, some even being forced to do so when the houses are in danger of falling down and their foundations are insecure. So what he wants to say here is that we don't demolish his houses generally anyway, just to make some stylistic changes, but we pull down houses only when the foundations are insecure and their house is in danger of falling down. So this building of knowledge, which Descartes is talking about demolishing, obviously needs to be demolished because its foundations are insecure. So that's the first things. And the manifestation, as we saw last time, of this insecurity of foundation is that we don't agree on even basic principle. There's no certainty. There are unending disputes. There are errors. And the knowledge we get is not useful. This example convinced me that it would be unreasonable for an individual to plan to reform a state by changing it from the foundations up and overturning it in order to set it up again, or again for him to plan to reform the body of the sciences or the established order of teaching them in the school. So that's more like stylistic changing. The real change for him is based on at the individual level, at the level of the self. But regarding the opinions to which I had hitherto given credence, I thought that I could not do better than undertake to get rid of them all at one go. So can't do it step by step or gradually, because the whole foundation is insecure and the whole building might come down. And this demolishing act is for the purpose of reconstruction in order to replace them afterward with better ones or with the same ones I had squared them with the standards of reason. And that's where we had to stop last time. So he wants to say standards of reason. For him is the foundation of knowledge should be secure, and if they are not secure, we need to demolish them. So that's his radical doubt, about which we will learn more in the coming days. So since the foundations are insecure, we need to demolish the whole building and reconstruct it. And when we are reconstructing, we want to replace the foundation with secure knowledge. Secure knowledge is the knowledge which is certain knowledge here. And last time we saw that for him, certain knowledge has two qualities. One, it cannot be doubted. That's why we will see that his method is that of doubt. And it is based on clear and distinct ideas. And once we have those first principles which are certain, then we can rebuild the edifice of knowledge again. So what does this tell us about his conception of knowledge? Descartes' conception of knowledge. Descartes' conception of one thing it tells us is knowledge is unity in the sense that at least the fundamental principles on which knowledge is based are ultimately one set for all knowledge. So this means that fundamental principles provide the foundation for all the rest of knowledge. Physics, ethics, arts. And in a well-known simile, Descartes described the whole philosophy which he equates with, knowledge. As we discussed earlier, that his conception of philosophy is very expensive as compared to what we know about philosophy today. So he likens knowledge to a tree. And so you have roots which you can say that they are the foundations. That's metaphysics for him. And these are the first principles, and they provide the foundation of knowledge. And by metaphysics, he means those first principles. And it also includes the basics of knowledge. So what we call epistemology today would include this metaphysics. And the trunk is physics. So roots are metaphysics, the trunk is physics, trunk. And then you have various branches of particular sciences. So then you have branches. So you have medicine, you have all other sciences, you have ethics, even arts, etc., etc. So in this sense, this analogy of tree tells us that analogy of tree and roots, for example, tells us that all knowledge is interconnected. And is unity in this sense. Unity in the sense that all ultimately rest on first principles, the same first principles. People have said that in this Descartes is different from Aristotle, for example, for whom different sciences are series of separate disciplines which have their own method, for example. So for Aristotle, the method of metaphysics is totally different from method of ethics, for example. And to a certain extent, this is true, this contrast, but I think this difference between Aristotle and Descartes shouldn't be overemphasized, because ultimately for Aristotle as well, metaphysics is the highest branch of science, and all other sciences are somehow related to that. But we can say that for Aristotle, this unity is not too rigid. On the other hand, for Descartes, at least from his tree simile, the unity seems to be more organic and more close. And as far as different methods are concerned, I don't think Descartes has one method for all sciences. The sciences can have different methods. And when he talks about, when we talk about Descartes' method, we are talking about his method to establish the foundations, first principles. So the method which we need to establish first principle has to be, really stringent, because according to Descartes, first principle don't, they can't, or they shouldn't be based on non-certain principle, or the principle which can be doubted. But that doesn't mean that level of stringence also applies to particular sciences and their inner workings, so to speak. Okay, so the first, the simile of tree, the first thing is the knowledge is the unity, in a sense in which we is the unity in the sense that it is ultimately all knowledge is based on the same first principles. John metaphysics. And the example of tree and branches also tells us that he has fairly utilitarian conception of knowledge, in the sense that for him, knowledge has to be useful. This is, for example, alluded to by the simile of tree, because tree bear fruits, and those trees which don't bear fruit, or their fruits are not good, they are not good trees. So the tree of knowledge, if it is based on sound sound foundations or roots, it will bear good fruits. But usefulness of knowledge has been emphasized in different systems of knowledge and different civilizations. But when Descartes is talking about usefulness, obviously he's talking about something more concrete, something more specific, which relate to the 16th, 17th century civilization, where you have had a scientific revolution. Descartes is part of that scientific revolution. And knowledge is focused on understanding humans and the world around them, not for the sake of understanding per se. Per se, as you may find in Greek civilization or Christian civilization, they used to call it wisdom. But you want to understand the universe and human beings in order to understand the laws and then use that understanding to control the world around us. Us for the sake of human welfare or happiness or whatever. So when Descartes talk about useful knowledge, and he accuses scholastics of speculative knowledge, what he's talking about useful, this useful has a specific meaning which is related to the 16th, 17th century scientific revolution, which is geared towards controlling the universe and human being for their rational organization, so that the world can be reorganized for the benefit of humans, so they can control their environment. And this ultimately relates to capitalism in the sense that capitalism is the part of the same movement in order to overcome scarcity and rationally organize economies through use of science, through capturing the universe for human happiness and fulfillment or whatever. So this specific conception of usefulness is part and parcel of Descartes' conception of knowledge. So knowledge is unity based on secure foundation, but the knowledge is useful in the sense in which we just described. And the third aspect of Descartes' conception of knowledge comes from the same simile of tree, but it also from the simile of the edifice or building. And his mention of foundation, secure foundation. And this is in contemporary debates, this is considered a conception of knowledge which is foundationalism. And that means that we have two tiers of knowledge. Knowledge is a building in the sense that the first tier is upper structure, and then you have foundations. Our foundations are based on the first principles, and in Descartes' foundationalism, those first principles are based on certain knowledge, and they basically are arrived at direct knowledge. It's a non-inferential knowledge. It's intuitive knowledge in that sense. And this non-inferential knowledge secures the foundation of the knowledge. And then you make inferences from these principles, or using these principles. And then you base through those inferences the upper structure of knowledge. So this is very much like Euclidean conception of knowledge. Geometry, for example, you have axioms, which are the first principle, and from there you have definitions, and then you have theorems, and from theorems through inferences you draw those theorems with the help of axioms and definitions. But Descartes is sort of universalizes this Euclidean method, although he doesn't say that the first principles are self-evident. You have to have a method of doubt to arrive at those first principles. But in its formal sense, it's very much like Euclidean structure or mathematical structure. It's a deductive system in that sense, in which the first principles are non-inferential, and then on the basis of those first principles you derive inferences which provide you the structure of the building, while the non-inferential knowledge or foundational knowledge that provide the foundations of the knowledge. So this is Descartes' conception of knowledge. Let us recapitulate it. The first knowledge is foundational in the sense that it is based on first principles, which are non-inferential, and you arrive at it through the first principle. You arrive at them through using your subjective reason in the sense I defined before, through demolishing what came before and then rebuilding based on the criteria of you only accept what you can't doubt possibly, and what is based on clear and distinct ideas. So that's how you arrive at the first principle. And the first principle, from first principle you then infer further knowledge. That can be physics, and then all other branches of knowledge. And second thing is that knowledge is useful in this sense in which technology is useful. So it's a particular conception of usefulness, basically humanistic, human-centered usefulness. And Number 3, with this you can arrive at the knowledge, which is two types. It is foundational in the sense that it's based on first principle, and from there, I think we mentioned this point already. But one thing I want to clarify, when I say subjective reason, I use it. What I wanted to say was that Descartes want to get rid of social constraint or socially influenced reason, because according to him, when we influence socially, our reason doesn't see through its own light, natural light. So that's why you need to focus on self. But as we saw, self itself is constructed through social. So you also get rid of the part of selves which are socially determined. So when you have left with bare self, only that self can see through natural light. So it is not subjective in this sense that it is determined by being. It's only subjective in the sense that pure subjectivity is the mirror through which we can see the ultimate truth. But natural light is something beyond me, something from outside. So in that sense, knowledge is not my creation. Yeah, he is still one step removed from Kant, so to speak. So by subjective we shouldn't understand that it is subjectively determined, but by subjective I wanted to sort of stress on that aspect of Descartes, whereby he tried to get rid of all the external influences on the self. So self, we have a pure self which can then reflect or see ultimate truth, and those ultimate truths are not subjective in more pejorative sense. They actually are transcendent in that sense. And but the thing is, just to finish on critical note, is looking for a self, pure self, beyond social constraint or reason which is not socially determined. But it's highly doubtful that we can ever have a reason which is not socially and culturally and naturally socially determined. So whenever Descartes, he seems like doing something new because he is going against. So whenever you go against what is already there, it's demolishing act. So there is a act of freedom, act of there can be an illusion that you are going against. So, but you are going against a particular social constraint. But when you start building, you are necessarily rebuilding new social constraint and new way of seeing things, which is itself, socially constrained. So and this leads to the whole problem of Cartesian circle and all that. But I don't want to, jump ahead of myself. So I'll just stop here and I'll start in the next video with Descartes' method, I guess, or something similar. Okay, see you then.